We are in a different setting tonight. We are still working on some things until we get better sponsoring. This is what we got.
We've got crayons, we've got colored paper, we've got all kinds of good stuff.
We've got it all. We got it all.
Yeah.
So some things while we're waiting on people to come on. Just some things coming up this week. You know, we're starting to reopen again, Joe. And last Sunday we had our first meeting back as a church, at least in a public manner. Some people have been meeting in kind of smaller settings and things of that sort. And but it was good to see everybody. Everybody did really well in keeping with, you know, what we've asked them to do with the face mask and the social distancing. And I know this week we're going to continue along with those same ways, but we're just glad to be back. We know some of it is an irritant, having to wear those masks and things, but we just want people to feel safe. And it's just really more about, you know, thinking of other people right now, I think is what's so important. And so we're gonna be back again. As far as our young people, our young adults, our youth, our kids, they're all kicking off activities and things next week. I know with our youth, they have a couple of things on Monday nights. They have a teen girls devotional. It's right here at our church building, and you can call the office and you can talk to Haley, and she'll tell you more about what that's about. And then on Wednesdays, the youth have a thing called Beach, Burgers, and Bibles. I had to say it very slow.
Yeah.
Very slow. That's Wednesday nights, and that is from 4 to 8. And then the kids, they've got a kids craft day coming up on June the 17th. So just a whole lot of things that's going on. So,
and, you know, maybe we ought to point out that, you know, Buggy Bunch is on our campus. They have their office set up here. And the reason we are relegated to the elementary school, the resource office,
yes,
is that they have 3 different Bible studies going on in our building tonight.
Yeah, they do.
And so they took over our normal studio in the Founders Hall, and here we are.
So if you hear children screaming, we had nothing to do with that. But anyway, so tonight is we're dealing with a very heavy topic, and is something that Joe and I have talked about for a couple of weeks. You know, we feel like it's important for us, you know, to talk about these things and to figure out what we can do, and the things that we have seen on, you know, television and in these videos. They're very disturbing. There's a lot of unrest that's happening in our country, and I think in the process of people grieving, people feel guilt. They feel maybe they're being attacked personally, but it's important we have the conversations, and I really believe it's important for predominantly white congregations to have those discussions as well, because a lot of us maybe just we don't understand some of the things that people talk about, and that's something that I believe in. I believe the Bible teaches us we to weep with those who weep, and right now there's a lot of that going on. I've done it even myself, just seeing some of the things, and they've been very hard. And I've talked to my African American brethren, and not only here in Florida, I've talked to people that I know in Alabama and California, and even one in Virginia. And I've actually joined a group. It's called Crying in the Wilderness, and it's just simply a group that's come together, and it's about talking races together, and they're talking, and it's a safe place to ask questions, things that, you know, you hear a lot about, but it's like it's good to have this dialogue. And so I think it's a time for weeping and letting people know that you care about them and that you love them tremendously. And I also believe, you know, what Ecclesiastes teaches us, and that is there's a time for every season. And just as people are crying out for Black Lives Matter, to say that our lives do matter, we also feel like is it's this time of grief, and there's also this time of talking about some solutions. And I think that's what we're trying to do here tonight. Joe and I will be the first to tell you, as two white males, that we don't have all the answers. We just don't. We wish we did. This is very emotional, very tense time, and we hope that nothing is misconstrued and maybe some things that we say here. But we also believe that we need to be offering some solutions to things as well. And that's what we're here to do, is just talk about what can we do to bring about a better world, a world that's filled with peace and unity and a lot of the things that are so important to us. And so Joe, being a former judge and been in this business for a long time, I think he really has some wonderful things to bring to the table tonight, and what we can do. So Joe, let me just turn things over to you. What are you thinking right off the bat?
Yeah, well, I mean, we want to get into some practical things that actually things we can act on and do, and well, let me just ask you this to kind of kick it off and then get it in the direction we want to go. I see, today we see that NASCAR is going to ban Confederate flags at their events. Yeah. So what do you think about that? Because you're an Alabama boy.
I'm an Alabama boy. I preached in Talladega. Yeah. So, I know that's not going to be very popular for a lot of folks. I know there's people, they don't see the Confederate flag as something that is racist. From when I was a kid, it was just something, I guess the perception I had, it means you're Southern. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think it is time to remove the Confederate flags, not because I'm offended by it, but because I know others are. And whether I understand that or not, I think it's important that, in the end, I just want to watch a good NASCAR race. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's important, and for people to be there and not be concerned about this feeling of maybe being hated or whatever it may be.
And now let me ask you this. Do you think by banning Confederate flags from NASCAR, that's going to change the heart of that person who truly has that hate in his heart for a different color of skin?
No. In fact, I would say if somebody is out there and they are racist and they see it as a racist way, it's not gonna change their heart. In fact, I think they would probably be pretty upset about it.
Be more aggravated.
Yeah, be even more aggravated.
And so that's why that's you can talk about a lot of things. You can join groups like you're talking about. Those tend to be like-minded people that get together and try to hash things out, which is good, and those are good things. But there's also some actions we can take, I think, based on the experiences I've had in my career, that can help police get better practices as far as how they interact with the people they deal with in their careers. And so I want to talk about some of those things. It's the things I'm talking about are not things that are specifically focused on racism, right. But I think they're things that have an impact on that tension between police officers and black defendants who are getting arrested, black citizens who are getting hassled, those kind of things that people are up in arms about, and more people are seeing that that's a problem that needs to be resolved. So this is one of those times you find in a culture or a community or in history where this is a good time to strike on some of these issues that haven't gotten much traction otherwise. Yeah. And now you have a precipitating event and you have an opportunity to go say, hey, we need to do this. Yeah. So the first thing I want to talk about is unions. And I'm sure if those who are listening in are paying any attention to the news, you're going to hear about these different things. In fact, Tracy, you sent me a little blurb from a little news report from Minneapolis,
right,
where it indicated that the police chief there, who was recently, within the last I think 3 or 4 years, hired there to kind of get things straightened out, it indicated he was going to withdraw from police union contract negotiations. And his comment is just exactly what the problem is with public employee unions, in my opinion. He said it's debilitating for a chief when there are grounds to terminate an officer and a third-party mechanism works to keep that person on the street. Unions with their contract negotiations and negotiate how you can discipline somebody, when you can fire somebody, when you can't, with appeal boards and all that kind of stuff, really gets in the way of a good chief or a good sheriff in certain situations that can evaluate who he has on his team, so to speak, and recognize that this person does not need to be in this position, and then terminate him. And I think we're going to see some action, and now's the time to be getting with your state legislators and with your local governments about let's look at these union contracts and make sure that we can easily terminate officers who are acting improperly, and make that a better process. If you look at it in the context maybe of public schools, and we all are kind of familiar with that. It's hard to get rid of this teacher that's not as competent as it should be because of union rules. And unions aren't bad for certain things. I think they're just, you got to have a better way to get rid of people that are incompetent. But one of the advantages of charter schools, and one of the things that makes them a pretty good educational experience for kids, is that they can terminate bad teachers without much hassle, and end up with a really good group of teachers. So unions is one issue that we're going to have to deal with, and this is a good time because if you're looking at the political divide, you can one side is all for unions, and one side is would be fine with getting rid of unions. And now's the time to get together and say, what can we do to make sure that even if you have a union, we're still able to get rid of these folks that shouldn't be carrying a gun on our streets.
Right.
So unions is one deal we can do.
Yeah.
We can do. No, the second one is one a little more, maybe a little more difficult to explain. So I'll try to be as brief as I can on it, but it's called qualified immunity. I think you might start hearing that word bandied around. And qualified immunity comes up. That's a judge-made exception to a statute that was passed in 1871. Now, 1871, we all know, is just aftermath of the Civil War. Mm-hmm. The 13th Amendment is passed. The slaves are set free. But we know what happened in the South. Right after the Civil War, there was still the Ku Klux Klan was big. You had really issues with the southern states readmitting them to the Union and trying to make sure that they were fairly treating everybody, which they weren't. And you can read your history books about that and the problems there were. So Congress was passing some statutes, those early civil rights statutes, and one of them they passed in 1871 was one that allowed you to sue a government official who violated your constitutional rights in order to get damages. Now, it sounds like something we ought to be able to do,
right?
And sue someone who violated my constitutional rights. But the Supreme Court came along, the U.S. Supreme Court came along and came up with the idea of qualified immunity, which means we're going to not just, there's going to be rules on when you can actually hold someone liable, even though he has violated your civil rights. And they made it so difficult, and they made the exception so strong that it's very difficult to sue someone for violating your constitutional rights. And the behind the statute was not necessarily about police at that time, but this time, in this day and age, it's probably a lot about the police. But back in those days, if a black person went to vote, there was all kinds of rules they had. You had to be able to read, or you had to be able to recite the Constitution of the United States, or some ridiculous thing, obviously meant to keep them from exercising their constitutional right to vote. So this qualified immunity made it difficult to do that. So how can we get rid of it? The Supreme Court can reverse their decision and say, look, that wasn't in the statute, we shouldn't have made that exception. Easier way to do it is Congress can write a new statute that says, no, not qualified immunity. The problem in that situation is there needs to be some leeway on close calls. And what I mean by that is a lot of times officers will stop, let's take this example, stop a car that they think is weaving, maybe drunk driving, and the judge may disagree with them and suppress that stop because the ruling is that he did not have probable cause to stop the vehicle and violated the Fourth Amendment. We don't necessarily want to be suing people who make a good faith decision and it's a close call and that kind of stuff. On the other hand, in other situations, you should be able to sue. Most particularly if you can show and we know it happens that sometimes there are people getting stopped because they're the wrong color in the wrong neighborhood, and so they get stopped. You talk to any African American, you're probably going to find out they have been part of that at some point in time, where they feel they've been unfairly stopped. If a state government or a local government or a city or a town has to start defending lawsuits for these and pay out money because of an officer who violates someone's rights, that may change some behavior and it may get some folks fired that need to be fired. That's qualified immunity. That's a little bit more, that's a little bit more legal if you want to call it that. And it's going to have to be a good statute written that treats everyone fairly. But it's definitely something that needs to be addressed.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, that's a lot of legalese.
Yes.
For me. But I love what you're saying there. These are, some things that could really help out. So, that's a lot of legal stuff, but what about me? What can I do in that, or is there anything I can do?
Well, that's someone, you get hold of your congressman, and you get hold of your U.S. senator, and they listen to us. And right now they're going to listen to us.
Yes, I think so.
If you have something you want to say to them.
Yeah.
It's interesting. The facts are, or the statistics are, that the most violent things that happen are not really skewed much toward an African American person versus a white person. In other words, the killings by police or the extreme violence by police on someone. Really, where we're talking about is that hassling that goes unremarked, if you want to call it that, because you get stopped, you get hassled. What are you doing out here? Why are you doing this or that? You don't get a ticket.
Right.
You don't do this or that, but you've been hassled.
Yeah.
And that's needs to stop.
Absolutely.
And so how do you stop it? Well,
right.
If all of a sudden now I can sue,
right, situation.
Because you're stopping me for no reason,
right.
Then that might make a difference in that situation.
Well, let me ask you this: how is this better than, say, body cameras?
Okay, body cameras are big, and a lot of people are pushing body cameras. It's just that the most recent study I saw, that was a study of, I'm talking like over 2,000 District of Columbia police officers. Body cameras didn't make any difference in the way they interacted with people.
Okay.
For some reason. Now that's one study.
Right.
But it seems to me that the money can be used in different ways than body cameras if they're really not that effective.
Okay. We'll talk about money later, but keep
yeah,
going.
Yeah, we're going to need to talk about money.
Yeah, we are.
Because some people want to put that money somewhere else other than with the police.
Yeah, exactly.
We need to kind of talk about
Right.
that a little bit. Militarization. There's a statute that was passed and a regulation to allow the military to pass on some of their surplus equipment to police agencies. And that was probably about, 30 or so years ago. And a lot of agencies, and we've seen it probably on TV a little bit,
Yeah.
Armored vehicles and
Right.
dressed to all kinds of, armor on the officers and all that kind of stuff. Once again, the most recent and best surveys have looked at that. The departments with the most military equipment commit the most improper force actions against defendants.
Wow.
Now, the question, why does that happen?
Right. Right.
Well, it's probably, you get in all the military stuff, you're kind of changing the culture of what policemen are doing.
Yeah.
When you get, really militarized SWAT teams, and, they're busting in doors, and they've got big armored cars, and you just get a different cultural feel on what you're doing as a police officer that we probably don't necessarily want in most places that you live.
Yeah.
In most places that you live. There may be some places that need that kind of equipment. I can see somewhere like in New York City that is the target of terrorists
Right.
on a regular basis.
Right.
Okay, you might have to have a specialized unit. Don't think you need it in most places.
So would you say, for example, I certainly don't have a problem with people protesting. I think that's an absolute right. I mean, we know there have been a few of those that have decided to riot and loot and hurt police officers and things of that sort, and we're definitely against that. But let's just say they're calling for a protest, and it's just a simple. That's what they're doing, and we see a lot of this going on around the world. So you would say maybe initially that's something that doesn't need to happen, is to pull out all the big guns and bring them out in the middle of a protest.
Yeah, I think the best practices are you're not trying to escalate a situation.
Right.
By showing up with massive armament
Right.
for a peaceful walk down the street.
Right.
Kind of thing. Now, when things go haywire,
Exactly.
you might have to call in the cavalry. But
Right.
but the facts are, the more you have this military type equipment, it's showing that the more you're getting involved in shootings and improper force by police using that equipment.
Yeah.
So that's one. Then no-knock warrants is I think something you're going to hear about.
Explain what a no-knock warrant is.
You can get a search warrant to go in someone's house because you have probable cause to believe that there's some kind of criminal activity going on in there. There's some kind of evidence of a crime in there. Most likely, you're going to see it most often for drug offenses. You make some buys out of the house, and then you go to the judge and you lay out with your undercover officer information that we bought drugs in this house, and you get a judge to sign off on a search warrant for the house. So what you typically ask for in that kind of situation may be a no-knock warrant. You're supposed to, when you search a house, knock and announce who you are
Right.
and why you're there. So knock, knock. This is the Vero Beach Police Department. We have a warrant to search your house. Open the door. You let them know who you are and what you're going to do. A no-knock warrant means you can come in like they do on Chicago PD
Right.
with the battering ram and knock the door down and come in and go flying in there for the purpose of making sure they don't flush the drugs down the toilet
Right.
or do something like that. What happens often, though, is, and we can all imagine that, you're a drug dealer, you are armed because there's rival gangs that may be breaking in and taking your stuff. And you're there to defend your house, and now here comes somebody busting in the door, unannounced, and you're going to pull your gun out, the cops have their gun out, and there's shooting that starts. So no-knock warrants are an issue, and need to make we need to kind of ratchet back on when no-knock warrants are given. They're mostly issued in trying to get some kind of physical evidence from inside, not something life-threatening like a person who's being held hostage or something like that. And so we probably just need to be okay with the fact that the drugs are flushed down the toilet.
Right.
And we don't get the
Right.
drugs, but we also avoid the risk of gunfire.
Right.
In
And that
that
protects
situation.
not just the people that you're going in the house, but also the law enforcement as well,
Yeah.
so they don't get caught in the.
Well, one of the incidents that occurred this year was one of the people was shot in her bed, I think, during that raid because as they came in, I think either her boyfriend or whoever else was in the house shot back at the
Right.
people coming in, and they shot and killed the girl in the bed, I think.
Yeah.
So that's tough. Last one I want to talk about, and there's more than these.
Oh, yeah.
This is a good one, though. I think this is a
I
good
like
idea.
this, yeah.
Mental health responders. Nationwide, probably about 17% of calls that come in to 911 involve someone with a mental health issue and not particularly a criminal issue. And officers are sent out to handle that, and they're not mental health responders. They're police officers,
Right.
and they're not trained to do that. So there's some programs in place. One's in Eugene, Oregon, that's kind of the one that everyone looks at that was real successful. And my understanding is that they're getting that set up in Miami, maybe to have a mental health responder program. But what you have are people that are trained to respond as mental health responders, and they've got all the gear they need, and they got their vehicle, and they've got the medicine they may need, and those kind of things, and they show up, and they're not escalating the situation with an officer showing up in uniform, which often someone who is having those kind of issues, that's a problem. They're showing up as someone who is going to kind of deal with the person in a completely different way.
Yeah.
In other words, someone who is a little bit off and maybe sitting in the street
Right.
and needs to be moved, well, you're going to come up, you and I are going to come up and grab them and get them off the street. Mental health person is going to do that a little differently.
Right.
And kind of de-escalate the situation instead of escalating the situation. When Eugene put it together, they ended up taking 20% of 911 calls and handling that, and that took that away from a police officer. And apparently, as far as talking about money,
Right.
and that might be one of the things where people are saying defund the police, and they talk about, having maybe more social services and stuff. Doesn't make any sense to defund the police because we know we need law enforcement. We know that. But a mental health responder
Right. Well, yeah.
is worth looking at.
Yeah, absolutely.
And apparently in Eugene, the mental health responder units cost about $800,000 a year
Yeah.
to run that unit, and that's a $58 million budget.
Yeah.
So you're taking care of 20% of the calls for $800,000 out of $58 million.
Right.
That's a pretty good bargain.
It is.
And maybe you get a little bit better approach with those folks who need that kind of approach.
Well, and what you also do is hopefully you're not going to be, throwing them into, common prison with just everybody, and that creates problems even within the prisons themselves when you have mentally ill folks.
Well, it definitely is a difficult thing to deal with the folks with mental health problems.
It is.
That's definitely a difficult thing to do. I got a quote from one of they interviewed one of the guys who was needed the mental health responder instead of a police responder. He said the police approach was usually name, serial number, and up against the van.
Up against the van.
That kind of approach. He said, but when he was having his panic attacks and the mental health responders showed up, they would just kind of sit them down and talk with them and calm them down and kind of do that kind of thing. I think you can make a difference in de-escalating police, citizen contact by dispatching the appropriate people in a situation like that. So those are things you can do, and the reason I like these things is they're ones that you can get with your local government official, your state government official, your federal government official. You can give them the input. They listen to us when we write letters and when we call.
And like you said, right now
they're listening.
They're listening.
Yeah.
They're listening very carefully.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, Joe. We hear quite a bit about, reform.
Mm-hmm. And,
I think what I've heard people say is that reform has not worked. Just, and of course some of these things are a type of reform. But what do you think, why is it that some of these things that we've tried in times past maybe didn't work quite so well?
Well, the reason, I'm throwing out these things that you can do that are practical things, if you want to call
Right.
it, that aren't necessarily, well, this is about black-white relations, and this is about, getting rid of racism I mean, I think as Christians, we know that we're not going to get rid of people hating other people. That's not going away.
That's the fallen world we live in.
That's the fallen world we live in. That's not going away. So some things you have to do, you take actions on that you can put some barriers up or parameters up which kind of prevent things from happening.
Right.
Keep things apart and get good results from previous situations where there were bad results.
Right.
All right, so what do we do, though? None of that stuff that we're talking about is necessarily going to change somebody's heart that's got a black heart.
Yeah.
That's just one that just hates other people.
Yeah.
All right, so what do we do? What do we do for people with hurting hearts and bad hearts?
Yeah.
Well, that's your job.
Come see me.
Yeah.
Come see me.
Well, I mean, we're talking. We have to change hearts. That's something that you can't legislate that.
Right.
They've got. The only way you're going to get a better heart is you're going to find Jesus.
Right.
Right. I mean, and you're going to get the Spirit.
Right.
To direct you, and you're going to be a follower of God, and you're going to start seeing people in a different light.
Yeah.
Because you're going to see them as people made in the image of God.
Absolutely. So there's a couple of questions that I'm seeing on here. One is Mackenzie says, not saying that cops aren't great, but it would be comforting knowing someone was coming that was trained and knew how to help. Mm-hmm. And then Lisa says, are there still grants for mental health care?
I think there are still grants and things like that. There's money, there's money out there. We know there's money out there. It just needs to be directed in the right place. In a light most favorable to the defund police people that are saying that, they need to be a little bit better. If they don't mean defund the police, then they don't need to say defund the police. Right. If they mean, let's get some money over here that will solve some of these problems and cut down on the police-citizen interaction and like the mental health problems. Right. That's one thing, but defund, we all know we need law enforcement officers.
Right.
I mean, we just had 2 days ago here in Vero, a guy from, guy with a wanted man from Virginia down here.
A ganger.
Stealing stuff, shoot 2 people trying to carjack a car. Cops chase him down, he shoots at them and gets shot. You need to have that person to call.
And we're thankful in our community. We have these guys who can
do that. They did a great job. They did a great job there. So we need that. But on the other hand, you talked about defunding.
Right.
And there's some stuff out there about Camden, New Jersey abolished their police department.
Right. What about them? Their crime rate went down. So what is?
Well, I mean, here's what they actually did. The reason they abolished the police department was that it was because of unions. They couldn't fire the people they wanted to fire, so they just abolished the whole department. Everyone's out of a job. They started a new law enforcement agency and made everyone apply again, and they didn't hire the people they didn't want to hire. But that's all out of the fact that you have a union and they can't do what they want to do to remedy who they have on their police force.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, here's another question. This comes from Ken. Where are all the qualified mental health people coming from?
The same place every other profession comes from. Colleges and universities, and people are trained. And I've got one looking right at me.
Yes, in our studio audience. Yeah.
And so, if you want to know where they come from, you can talk to Darian Meyer, who was on our show a couple of weeks ago.
That's right.
And she will tell you where they come from.
Very good. Very good. And so, and before I forget it, this Sunday, we talk about the heart transformation and just how important Scripture is to us and God's Spirit is to us. And we've started last week a new series on Genesis. And so this week we come back with the very first sermon. Last week was kind of an introduction, but we're looking at from chaos to order, and that our God, we're living in a time of real chaos right now, And these are things that we can do. These are great things. I hope they come up with 100 more that are even better than what we've talked about here tonight. But how do we deal with these things? Because, like I said, I mean, there's a lot of frustrated people right now, and people are posting things that are, really angry filled, and it's a time that we need to listen and grieve, understand people, and just let God help transform us to where we need to be. And we're a part of a different kingdom than the kingdoms of the world, and so this is where we go and we fight our battles is with the kingdom. Anything else you think of, Joe?
Well, there's all kinds of things to think of, but I think the ones that we've mentioned tonight are going to be ones that you see happening. You're going to start reading it in the paper. You're going to see that Congress is going to be talking about qualified immunity. Your local folks are going to be talking about unions and union contracts, and we're going to be better at dealing with mental health folks.
Yeah.
I think the stats are like 25% of those, maybe even more, killed by law enforcement officers have mental health problems.
Yeah.
They just can't be dealt with.
Right.
Appropriately.
Well, whatever we can do to try to help make real change in our world. Of course, here as a church, there's a spiritual aspect, but we also are very concerned about our community, not just the citizens, but also law enforcement. We're concerned about everybody. We really believe that. So.
Yeah. I mean, and we go back to, where we're the situation we're in right now, starting with the Minneapolis police officer who had his knee on that gentleman's neck. I mean, that's somebody whose heart is not in the right place.
No.
That's someone with a heart that we don't want in any kind of position of power over somebody. Nobody with a heart for Jesus would be sitting there with a knee on someone's neck.
Yeah.
So, once again, that's always the answer, obviously, but that's where we come in. We can call our representatives about these kind of things, but we need to get out and talk about Jesus to our community.
Yeah. and have a heart for people.
Right.
If you watch that video and some of the other ones that we've seen here recently, I mean, if your heart doesn't break, if your automatic response is try to vilify anybody in that situation, that's not where it should be. It's a human life, and those are important to God because He made us and He kept us. So, Joe, I think that's it, right? Unless you have something else.
We're good.
We appreciate you tuning in tonight. We know this is a very sensitive subject. As I said in the beginning, if you didn't catch it, we don't have all the answers. We're not even sure the answers we have given here are some possible suggestions or even the best ones. But we believe that it's important to have these conversations and to talk about that and to talk with people of color right now that are fearful, that are grieving, and just tell them that you love them and you care for them, and we just continue to bring about a peacefulness within our country. So at this time, we're going to sign off, but we appreciate you being with us.